Why did Asia's brightest star disappear at his peak without a word? Leslie Cheung lit up the world with elegance, courage, and quiet rebellion. They called him a legend, but behind that smile was a pain no one saw. He broke every rule of gender and love, and when fame became too loud, he chose silence. His songs, his eyes, his final goodbye, all held a truth the world wasn't ready for. This is the story they never told you. Stay with us. In the chaos and splendor of 1950s Hong Kong, where colonial splendor contrasted with the pulsating pulse of Chinese street markets, a boy was born into a life teetering between privilege and deprivation. His name was Chung Fat Chung, though the world would one day know him as Leslie Cheung. Born in 1956, he was the youngest child in a well-to-do but emotionally fractured family. His father, Chung Yu-hui, was no ordinary tailor. He tailored suits for international icons, from Marlon Brando to Hong Kong's elite. Their home was elegant. Their reputation was impeccable. But comfort did not mean intimacy, and wealth could never replace warmth. Leslie was the youngest child, the 10th in a home where affection was often limited and expectations were constant. His older siblings had forged their own paths long before he had, leaving him alone in a family too busy to notice the quiet boy in the corner. His mother left when he was young, a wound that never fully healed. His father stayed, but emotionally he should have left too. Discipline was strict, love was conditional, success was demanding. Tenderness? That was a language Leslie had to learn on his own. He was not raised on lullabies or bedtime stories. He was raised in silence, and in that silence, he discovered a secret world of sound. While the other children chased kites and laughed in the alleys, Leslie sat alone, glued to the radio. Melodies were more than music. They were messages. Lyrics were more than stories. They were lifelines. And slowly, he began to believe. Maybe one day his voice would speak the language he had never heard at home. At 13, Leslie was sent to the United Kingdom to attend boarding school. In theory, it was a wonderful opportunity. In reality, it was exile. The skies were gray. The food was unfamiliar. The laughter in the cafeteria was in a language he could barely understand. He often ate alone, literally alien, thousands of miles from Hong Kong and even farther from anything resembling home. But Leslie adapted, quietly, cautiously. He kept his head down, watched, listened. Eventually, he enrolled in a textile design program at Leeds University, not because he loved textiles, but because it felt like a tribute to his father's legacy, an attempt to belong. But even as he drew patterns and studied cuts, he knew his thread was pulling him elsewhere. When his father's health began to fail, Leslie left university and returned to Hong Kong. Officially, it was a gesture of filial duty. But the deeper truth? He had never belonged to that gray, orderly world. He was not made for measurements and conformity. He was made for moments, fragile, fleeting, full of emotion. When he returned home, he did not return as a prodigal son. He returned as a question mark. No degree, no job, no future mapped out, just a quiet determination and a heart too full to be silent. He took any job he could find, bartending, shoe sales, TV set errand boy, but nothing really clicked. Until he stepped in front of the microphone. That moment changed everything. In 1977, when he was just 21, Leslie entered the ATV Asian Singing Contest. He took the stage with no pomp, no style, just a boy with a shaky voice. His performance wasn't flashy, it wasn't perfect, but it was raw, real. And in a culture where vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness, Leslie's quiet emotion was a revelation. He didn't win first place, but he didn't need to. He walked away with a contract and an opportunity. From that shadowy stage, the youngest son of a forgotten home began to write the first verse of his life's symphony. His early years were not glamorous. His debut album was ignored. Critics scoffed, DJs ignored him. But Leslie didn't follow trends. He didn't force masculinity. He didn't pretend. He leaned into his softness, his elegance, the very qualities others warned him to hide. And that, his strength. He sang wherever they'd let him, nightclubs, charity events, forgotten stages, but he was always watching, always listening. Not just to applause, but to silence, to the moments where a lyric caught in someone's throat. Slowly, he wasn't just building a career, he was building an identity. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the boldest, but he was human. And in a city that pressed people into masks, Leslie dared to wear his own face. Young women adored him. Men were captivated. Elders frowned. But youth saw freedom. In Leslie's voice, they found permission to feel, to question, to be. By the late 1970s, Cantopop was blooming, and at its edge stood a young man who never asked for permission, but carved his place anyway, note by note. Behind every smile was uncertainty. Behind every curtain call, a flicker of fear. But Leslie Cheung made a decision early on. He would rather fail as himself than succeed as someone else, and in a world that told him to stay quiet, Leslie Cheung chose to sing. He left that gloomy competition stage. No trophy, no confetti, but something had changed. Leslie Cheung was no longer invisible. Hong Kong had listened to his voice, and quietly, they began to sense something they had yet to name. What started as a whisper was slowly becoming a movement. By the early 1980s, Leslie had become one of the brightest rising stars of Cantopop. But unlike his contemporaries, he was not known for his loud ostentation or his carefully crafted masculinity. He did the unthinkable. He remained soft. While others built up a shell, Leslie brought vulnerability. While others were imitating Western idols, he was creating something uniquely his own. Something fragile, elegant, and quietly powerful. His early albums, once overlooked, began to gain traction. Songs like Monica and Wind Blows On became defining songs for a new generation. Young, catchy, yet emotionally nuanced. His voice wasn't just heard, it was felt. And while teenagers screamed at concerts, critics noticed something more subtle. This wasn't just a pop star, this was an artist. But with fame came scrutiny. The media couldn't stop following him, but they also couldn't understand him. The way he moved on stage, fluid, graceful, unafraid of soft fabrics or heavy makeup, was in direct opposition to the rigid standards of male performance of the time. He didn't act feminine. He didn't act masculine. He simply existed. And that confused people. The whispers turned to questions. The questions turned to gossip. Is he too feminine? Is he hiding something? Journalists began to swarm, talk shows began to tease, and society's discomfort with ambiguity began to grow. But Leslie never got defensive. He never defended himself, never denied, never gave the world the manliness it demanded. He let the music do the talking. Because he knew something deeper. Outstanding looks are easy to come by, extraordinary temperament is hard to find. In a world obsessed with looks, Leslie possessed that rarest of things. Presence. His beauty was undeniable, but it wasn't just his cheekbones or his symmetry. It was the way he carried himself. The way his gaze lingered in silence. The way his voice cracked softly at the peak of a song. He had a beauty that couldn't be duplicated. A charisma born of contradiction, masculine and feminine, strong and soft, timeless and fragile. On stage, he was unbound. He danced not to impress, but to express. He wore lace, velvet, bold colors. He experimented with genderless styles not to shock, but because they reflected who he was inside. Someone who refused to be labeled, limited, or simplified. His concerts were performances, yes, but they were also confessions. They were like diary entries written under bright lights. Seeing Leslie live was like watching a man break down 100 walls without saying a word. He didn't sing love songs, he melted them. And when he smiled at the crowd, it wasn't with the glitz of a pop machine, it was with the pain of someone who had yearned, waited, and finally found someone who would listen. Yet the entertainment industry tried to hold him back. Managers pushed for a more masculine image. Studios warned him not to be too bold. He was advised to play it safe, but Leslie, ever the quiet rebel, fought back, not with rage but with grace. He simply continued to express himself, and each time another boundary was broken. He understood the power of his presence. He saw how young people, especially those who felt different, looked at him with hope. They didn't just listen to his music. They saw themselves in him, in his gentleness, in his refusal to conform, in his turning being other into art. And so, he became more than a singer. He became an icon. of freedom, of defiance, of unyielding beauty. In a culture that feared complexity, Leslie Cheung dared to live fully. But such profound artistry did not go unnoticed. And soon the film world called his name, because somewhere between the spotlight and the shadows, directors saw what fans already knew. Leslie was not acting on stage. He was expressing himself. And that truth deserved to be portrayed on the big screen. His legacy in those early years was not just about record sales or chart-topping singles. It was about changing the image of an icon. What it could sound like, what it could feel like. He gave fans the right to love him, not just love him, but love themselves more boldly, more gently, more truly. In the 1980s, Leslie Cheung was more than a pop idol. He was a mirror, a gentle rebel, a beautiful contradiction in a world that craved clarity. And for those who needed proof that gentleness could be strong, that elegance could be rebellious, that a man could be both soft and strong, he was living proof. He didn't need to shout who he was. His existence was the answer. By the mid-1980s, Leslie Cheung was already a household name in the music industry. But what happened next redefined him, not just as a singer, but as one of the most captivating screen actors in Asian cinema. He didn't just enter the film industry, he transformed it. He blurred the lines between acting and confession, between role and reality. And in doing so, he gave audiences something rare, a glimpse of the truth he couldn't tell. His early film roles were charming, playful, often revolving around romantic or youthful themes. But it was John Woo's 1986 film, A Better Tomorrow, that first established him as a serious actor. As the vulnerable young Kit caught between justice and brotherhood, Leslie Cheung gives a performance of emotion and restraint. He doesn't try to dominate the screen. He listens, he reacts, he breaks down under pressure in brutally honest ways. It's not just acting, it's empathy on display. Then comes Rouge, 1987, where he stars opposite Anita Mui in a ghostly love story that haunts the city and its people. Leslie plays a wealthy young man caught up in love and then time. The film is an elegy, fresh, painful, and tragic. And in it, he begins to demonstrate what would become his cinematic signature: emotional transparency. No pretension, no hiding, just sadness, longing, tenderness, unveiled, unapologetically. But it was Days of Being Wild, 1990, that changed all that. Directed by Wong Kar-wai, the film was stripped down, dark, and poetic. Leslie's Yuddy was a reckless playboy on the run from love, haunted by abandonment. He was a man lost in his own legend. Yet the sadness in Leslie's eyes, the restlessness in his voice made it impossible to look away. Wong didn't just give him lines, he gave him space. Space to express wordless pain, to let silence breathe. And Leslie used every moment of silence as a weapon and a whisper. And then came the masterpiece, Farewell My Concubine, 1993. Directed by Chen Kaige, the film was set in Beijing opera and followed the two actors through decades of love, betrayal, and national upheaval. Leslie plays Cheng Diei, a man trained from a young age to play female roles on stage, trained so thoroughly that the lines between his identity and his art begin to dissolve. It's the performance of a lifetime, and it's more than acting, it's a revelation. As Diei, Leslie dons makeup, jewelry, and wallows in pain. He looks into the camera and into his co-star's eyes with a look so full of emotion that it moves international audiences. He becomes a living paradox, both beautiful and broken, both masculine and feminine, both victim and rebel. The film was a huge success, winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and catapulting Leslie onto the international stage. But for him, the role is more than just praise. It's truth. It's about what it means to love deeply in a world that punishes those who are too sensitive. Audiences saw excellence, but gay audiences, they saw themselves. Although Leslie never came out publicly during this period, his roles spoke for themselves. He didn't need to reveal his identity in interviews. He lived every close-up, every tear, every pained glance. His art was his confession, and for many that was more powerful than any headline. His collaborations with directors like Wong Kar-wai and Chen Kaige became artistic relationships, built on trust. They didn't just give him characters, they gave him windows. windows to process his own pain, to dispel his fears, to embody desire, repression, and beauty in equal measure. Leslie turned the camera into a diary. He didn't perform to entertain. He performed to survive. Off-screen, he remained private, polite, calm, but on-screen he let go. He was free. And in that freedom, something magical happened. Generations of viewers began to see the screen not as an escape, but as a reflection. They saw that gender could be bent, that love could ache in any body, that beauty could come from pain. Leslie's presence on screen didn't just add color to a scene, it redefined masculinity in Asian cinema. His beauty was never aggressive. His emotion was never exaggerated, but it lingered, even after the credits rolled. And perhaps that's what made Leslie Cheung such a unique artist. On stage, he shined. In interviews, he smiles. But on screen, he tells the truth. Not just the truth about his characters, but the truth about a man quietly searching for identity, longing, and loneliness in a world that demands nothing. In the shadows of cinema, Leslie Cheung is not hiding, he is revealing. And with each role, he writes another page of the love letter he can never send in words. They met in the early 1980s, in a time and place that offered no template for the kind of love they would share. Hong Kong, still shrouded in conservative values and rigid traditions, was not ready for the idea of two men walking together. Not as business partners, not as friends, but as something much more intimate. And yet Leslie Cheung and Daffy Tong, whose official name is Tong Hock Tek, chose each other. Their love story was not written about in newspaper headlines or shouted from rooftops. It was lived quietly, steadfastly. For more than 20 years, they shared a home, a life, a rhythm. They walked the red carpet together. They raised pets together. They celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, quiet Sundays together. And though the world often refused to call them by their real names, they knew. Leslie once said in an interview, in his characteristically poetic way, "Daffy is my soulmate." 4 words, no embellishment, no regrets. That was enough. They never labeled themselves. Leslie didn't need to shout "I'm gay" to assert his identity. Instead, he let his life speak for itself. In every decision to bring Tong to an event, in every gesture of unabashed love, in every refusal to deny who he was declaring something revolutionary in its gentleness. It wasn't shock, it was truth. And truth in that cultural moment was the bravest thing. But the pressure never completely went away. Hong Kong society in the 1980s and 1990s was not built to accept love as they were. Public figures were expected to portray perfection, a stoic, uncontroversial, heterosexual norm. For someone like Leslie, who displayed sensitivity and broke gender boundaries on stage, the expectations were even heavier. He was a star admired by the world. But at home, he was simply a man in love. That made for a double life, glamorous and lonely, praised and doubted, seen but not fully known. Their relationship, while often kept out of the public eye, was by no means hidden behind closed doors. Friends, staff, fellow artists, they all knew. And what they saw was not a scandalous affair. It was devotion. Quiet, patient, unwavering devotion. There were challenges. Sometimes the paparazzi followed them. There's a story about one day, they were walking hand in hand, and Daffy noticed the photographers approaching. Instinctively, he tried to let go. Leslie, sensing the gesture, simply squeezed his hand tighter and kept walking. No words, no drama, just a silent promise, "I won't let you go for their comfort." In moments like that, Leslie became more than a celebrity. He became an icon, not of rebellion, but of quiet courage. He didn't fight with fists or slogans. He fought with determination, with presence, with choosing love over and over again, no matter who was watching. And then there was the music. In one of his most intimate performances, Leslie stood under soft stage lights and sang "The Moon Represents My Heart." He sang the song not to the crowd, but to a man sitting quietly in the audience. That man was Daffy Tong. The dedication wasn't confusing, it was clear. And even then, fans understood. Leslie didn't just sing about love, he lived it. Tong was more than just an outsider. He was a literal companion. When Leslie toured, Tong was often there. When Leslie felt the weight of fame weighing on his shoulders, Tong was the one who helped him carry it. He was quiet, He was not famous, but his presence sustained Leslie in ways the public could never see. Their love endured not only time, but also scrutiny. They weathered tabloids, cultural backlash, and personal storms. Yet what held them together was not challenge. It was something softer: trust. A trust built quietly over decades of shared dinners, pets fed, letters written, and hands held when the lights went down. And when loss came, sudden, quiet, unimaginable, Cheung remained. On April 1, 2003, when the news of Leslie's death shocked the continent, Cheung did not rush to appear before the cameras. He did not make a dramatic statement. Instead, he grieved the way they do: quietly, sincerely, and with dignity. He stood at Leslie's memorial, dressed in black, accepting condolences from thousands of fans who felt they had lost a loved one too. And when asked in later years why he never married, Cheung simply replied, "Because I had him." Today, their love is no longer a rumor or a coded gesture. It is a documented truth, woven into the legacy of a man who devoted himself to his craft, his fans, and the people he loved most. Their relationship is studied, admired, and remembered, not just as a rare relationship in the entertainment industry, but as one of the most moving love stories Asia has ever known. They never asked the world for permission. They just loved each other, and that was enough. By the late 1990s, Leslie Cheung had reached a level of success that most artists could only dream of. He was everywhere, on magazine covers, award shows, and on screens across Asia. But few knew that beneath the aura of fame, something much darker had begun to take root. In the quiet moments, when the lights dimmed and the crowds dispersed, a shadow crept in. It wore no clothes. It had no audience. Its name was depression. At first, the signs were barely noticeable. Leslie still smiled for the cameras, gave interviews gracefully, and lit up every stage he stepped onto. But close friends noticed the tired eyes, the long silences, the growing distance. In an industry that praises perfection and punishes weakness, Leslie bore his pain with dignity. No explosions, no scandals, just a deepening silence between songs. But in that silence, he found a way to speak out. In 2000, Leslie kicked off what would become one of the most iconic concert series in Asian pop history, the Passion Tour. But it was more than a concert. It was a confessional, disguised as a stage. Clad in flowing gowns, sheer fabrics, and dramatic cutouts, Leslie blurred the lines between gender, performance, and person. One night, he wore a wedding dress. Another night, he glided across the stage in red sequins and a feathered cape. To the casual observer, it was a stage. To those who looked closer, it was a message. This is me. All of me. Each song was like a farewell letter written in glitter and tears. He performed I Honestly Love You not as a pop ballad, but as a final whisper to someone he loved deeply. His body moved gracefully, but his eyes often reflected an inner storm. Fans screamed, cheered, reached out to him, yet at times he seemed distant, like a man singing from the edge of an abyss that no spotlight could reach. The world applauded his courage, but few understood the price he paid. Off-stage, Leslie struggled. His depression worsened. He sought treatment. He took medication. He tried psychotherapy. He leaned on his longtime partner, Tong Hak Tak, who was always there for him, steadfast and faithful. But even love has its limits when it comes to fighting an inner war, and Leslie's fight was relentless. The pressure was not just internal. Society, though changing, still clung to old stereotypes. Paparazzi still stalked him. Rumors still dogged him. And though he broke barriers in art, the world was not always kind to those who broke them in life. At an award ceremony, a public figure mocked Leslie's sexual expression, making his courage a cruel joke. He stood there, humiliated, but he did not retaliate. He bowed his head and kept walking. That silent endurance, so graceful, so powerful, was part of Leslie Cheung's legend. But even legends have limits. For all the love he gave, for all the strength he showed, there were corners of his heart the world could never fully see. In those quiet places behind the stage lights and the ovations lived a weight too heavy to name. On the morning of April 1, 2003, Leslie carried himself with the same calm grace that had defined him for decades. He greeted people with kindness. He moved through the world politely, gently. And then, he slipped into the silence he had long known. There was no drama, no spectacle, just a farewell written in soft words. A note thanking those who had loved him, a whisper to the world about a pain that had lingered for far too long. And when the news broke, it felt like time had stopped. Across Hong Kong, across Asia, across generations, the grief was immediate. Fans collapsed in tears, TV and radio stations went silent, flowers lined the sidewalks, even the press, often so quick to sensationalize, stepped back. Because this wasn't just the end of a celebrity story. This was heartbreak on a collective scale. A headline read, "Hong Kong has lost its brightest star." And for once, no one argued. The city had lost a part of its soul. The stage felt darker, the world quieter, and in every household that had once played his music, there was a moment of stunned stillness, followed by weeping. Because Leslie Cheung was never just an actor, never just a singer. He was a voice for those who had none, a mirror for the misunderstood, a symbol of courage in a world that often rewards conformity. In life, he dared to live boldly, and in his departure, he reminded us of a truth too easily forgotten, that even the strongest lights can flicker, that sometimes those who shine the brightest are also those who carry the heaviest shadows. But even as we mourned, we remembered, not just the pain, but the beauty. Not just the goodbye, but the countless moments of radiance he gave us. Leslie didn't leave us with emptiness, he left us with legacy. And long after the world moved on, he remained, in our memories, in our music, in our hearts. His funeral drew tens of thousands, but the grief didn't stop there. It lasted for months, years, decades. In the years that followed, his songs remained on the charts. His films were shown at universities, his face appeared in art museums in Korea, Japan, and elsewhere. Young people discovered him through old clips and cried as if he were still alive. And perhaps, in a way, he is still alive. Because Leslie Cheung lives not only in the spotlight, he lives in people's hearts. In every artist who dares to show vulnerability. In every lone fan who sings his song in the dark. In every soul who has ever loved differently, felt deeply, or walked this world looking for belonging. His last note ended not in tragedy, but in gratitude. And his life, it did not end that April morning. It became something else. A legend, a memory, a melody that will never stop playing. In a world that is constantly changing, some names become immortal. Leslie Cheung was one of them. When he was alive, Hong Kong cinema was at its peak, producing masterpieces that shaped the dreams of an entire continent. But when he left, everything changed. The lights didn't just dim, they transformed. The energy, the elegance, the magic that defined Hong Kong's golden age seemed to be gone. One journalist wrote, with quiet sadness, "The tragedy is that, now that Leslie is gone, there will never be another true star in Hong Kong." And perhaps that was no exaggeration. Perhaps it was a prophecy. Leslie Cheung was more than just a pop idol or a box office king. He was Hong Kong's last great film star, an icon whose career marked the final chapter of the city's most brilliant artistic period. The moment he stepped off the stage, the curtain drew down on an era. But his legacy still shines. He is the only Asian artist to have been named by CNN as one of the 5 most influential entertainers of all time, a recognition that speaks not only of fame, but also of influence. Leslie broke all boundaries, between East and West, between masculinity and femininity, between genre and gender, between being loved and loving. He never screamed for attention, he simply was, and that was enough to inspire millions. In 1996 and 2000, Hong Kong twice held a cultural phenomenon, a public vote to choose the 4 beauties of Chinese entertainment. Leslie won both times. He didn't just outshine male stars, he beat out legendary actresses like Quan Chi Lam and Li Ruok-tung, women who were often dubbed the most beautiful women in Asia. It wasn't a contest, it was an affirmation. Leslie's beauty went beyond bone structure. It was something supernatural, something that couldn't be replicated. Today, his image adorns museums across Korea and Japan. His songs are taught in music classes. His performances are still required viewing at film schools. His greatest legacy, however, isn't what can be displayed in galleries. It's what remains in the hearts of those who knew him, or simply knew him, He had fans all over Asia, but more than that, he had fans in the industry. People who grew up with him and later stood on the same stages he once walked. Superstars like Zhang Zi, Jackie Cheung, Eason Chan, Hu Ge, Song Hye Kyo, Kim Jae-jung, John Ji-hyun. They don't just respect him, they call him their hero, their muse, their Jege. Because Leslie Cheung is not only brilliant on screen, he is also brilliant as a person. In an industry known for its big ego, he is still very gentle. Amidst his fame, he is always kind. He mentors young artists, supports those around him, treats every staff member with respect. He is the rare kind of celebrity who is not only admired but also loved. Stories of his generosity are passed down like folklore. He stayed late to comfort a crying dancer. He didn't let his worried co-stars feel small. He always showed up on time, was fully present, and was a real person. A friend described him simply, a beautiful man with a beautiful soul. And perhaps that is why, when he passed, the grief was not only great but profound. Fans were not just mourning a celebrity. They were mourning a certain ability that someone could be talented, fearless, and still be good. That someone could be honest in a world that required them to lie. That someone could exude elegance and strength in a single glance. Leslie once said, "What I am most proud of in life is not my success or my fame. It is that I have been Leslie Cheung all along." And that is what made him unforgettable. He never bowed. He never hid. He gave the world all of himself, his flaws, his beauty, his courage, his pain, and in doing so, he allowed others to do the same. To this day, Daffy Tong still keeps Leslie's mementos, his favorite books, his music, and his handwritten notes. Every April, he quietly visits Leslie's resting place. He has vowed never to marry, because as he once said, "I already have him. There will never be another." And the world agrees. When people talk about Leslie now, they use the language usually reserved for dreams. Director Chen Kaige once said, "I think Leslie belongs to a bygone era. He has eyes that we only see in beautiful dreams of the past." And maybe he was right. Maybe Leslie wasn't meant to stay. Maybe he was a brief, brilliant moment that heaven gave to the world. One fan wrote, "He was so perfect, heaven called him home. He was the last gift given to humanity." But the gifts never go away. They resonate in every small voice that dares to speak, in every queer artist who steps into the light, in every song that makes someone feel seen. Leslie lives on. He lives on like a song, full of haunting high notes and chords, unexpected climaxes, and unforgettable melodies. And like any truly great song, his resonance is eternal. And now that you've walked through his story, how does your heart feel? Because Leslie Cheung wasn't just a superstar. He was a soul ahead of his time, a man who chose tenderness over fear, honesty over safety, love over silence. In a world that begged him to hide, he stood tall and let beauty, music, and truth speak for him. His songs weren't just melodies, they were confessions. His films weren't just roles, they were reflections. And his love for Daffy wasn't just romance, it was courage in its purest form. So we ask you, not just as viewers, but as fellow human beings, does Leslie Cheung deserve to be remembered as Asia's first true LGBTQ+ icon? We believe, wholeheartedly, yes. And maybe, just maybe, you feel it in your chest too. Because after hearing of his quiet battles, his radiant love, and that heartbreaking final goodbye, something inside us lingers. A hush, a warmth, a tear. This wasn't just a life, it was a legacy. And it reminds us all to live authentically, to love without apology, and to carry the light of those who dared to shine before us. Thank you, Leslie Cheung, for choosing tenderness over fear and truth over silence. You gave us more than music. You gave us permission to feel. If this story moved you, share it. Let his light reach someone who needs it today. And if you believe voices like his still matter, subscribe, stay with us, and help the legacy alive. What part of Leslie's story stayed with you most? Tell us below.